If you've flown economy recently, you've probably had the same thought at some point during the flight. You're squeezed between two strangers, your knees are practically touching the seat in front of you, and you're wondering when airlines decided that lawn chairs were an acceptable seating option. It feels like every year there's a little less space, a little less legroom, a little less comfort. And judging by the way people rush to book exit row seats, you'd think airlines were handing out luxury suites instead of a few extra inches of room. And here's the truth. Yes, airline seats really are getting smaller, but it's not because engineers suddenly forgot how to design comfortable cabins. It's the result of one of the most successful business decisions in modern transportation. Because over the last few decades, airlines discovered something incredibly valuable. They learned that comfort isn't actually the product they're selling anymore, the price is. And that simple realization completely changed the economics of flying. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to a time when flying was almost unrecognizable compared to today. In the 1920s, commercial aviation wasn't glamorous. Airplanes were loud, unpressurized, and often uncomfortable. Flights were heavily affected by weather, turbulence was common, and aircraft carried fewer than 20 passengers at a time. Flying was expensive, inconvenient, and often slower than taking a train. Most people never even considered stepping onto an airplane. Things began to change in the 1930s and 1940s as aircraft technology improved. Cabins became enclosed and heated. Pressurized aircraft allowed airlines to fly higher and faster. Flight attendants appeared, service improved, and air travel slowly transformed from a risky adventure into a legitimate form of transportation. Then came the golden age of air travel, the era we've all seen in old movies. Passengers arrived at the airport dressed in suits and elegant dresses. Flight attendants served steak and champagne, and flying felt less like taking a bus through the sky. Airlines back then competed aggressively on service and comfort. Some aircraft even featured lounges where passengers could socialize during the flight. But most importantly, there was space. A Douglas DC-3, one of the most iconic airliners of the era, offered around 39 inches of seat pitch. That's the distance between your seat and the seat in front of you. For comparison, most economy seats today offer around 30 inches, and some budget carriers go as low as 28. That's roughly the difference between comfortably crossing your legs and spending the flight negotiating with the tray table for ownership of your knees. Of course, there was a reason planes were built that way. Flying was incredibly expensive. In the 1950s, a round-trip ticket from Chicago to Phoenix cost the equivalent of roughly $1,168 in today's money. A one-way flight to Europe could cost more than $3,000. Everything changed in 1978 when the United States passed the Airline Deregulation Act, a law that would completely transform air travel. Before deregulation, airlines couldn't freely choose many of their routes or ticket prices because much of the industry was regulated by the government. Since airlines couldn't easily compete by offering cheaper fares, they competed on something else: service. Bigger seats, better meals, more legroom, and a more comfortable experience. Deregulation changed the rules. Airlines could now compete directly on price. Competition intensified, new carriers entered the market, and lowering fares became the fastest way to attract customers. But lower fares came with a trade-off. As competition intensified, airlines discovered something surprisingly simple. Most passengers cared more about price than comfort. Faced with the choice between a cheaper ticket and a few extra inches of legroom, most people chose the cheaper ticket. That single realization would eventually reshape the airline industry around the world. The low-cost airline model spread rapidly. In Europe, carriers like Ryanair and EasyJet built their businesses around ultra-cheap fares. In the United States, airlines such as Spirit and Frontier followed a similar strategy. In Asia, where more than 100 million people take their first flight every year, low-cost carriers helped make air travel affordable for an entirely new generation of passengers. Despite operating on different continents, these airlines shared the same philosophy: strip away anything passengers aren't willing to pay for, and advertise the lowest fare possible. Free meals disappeared. Checked baggage became a separate charge. Seat selection became a paid upgrade. Features that had once been included in every ticket slowly became optional extras. Passengers voted with their wallets, and airlines paid attention. Comfort stopped being the product. transportation became the product. Everything else became an upsell, and once airlines realized they could lower fares by fitting more passengers onto the same aircraft, shrinking seats became a business strategy. At first glance, reducing legroom by a few inches doesn't seem like a big deal, but imagine a Boeing 737. A typical economy row contains 6 seats. By redesigning seats to be thinner and reducing seat pitch by just a few inches, airlines can often fit an additional row into the aircraft. At that point, the question of shrinking legroom is no longer up in the air, it's simple economics. Let's do the math. That extra row adds just 6 passengers, which doesn't sound impressive until you look at the numbers. Let's assume those 6 seats are sold for an average fare of $150. If that aircraft operates 5 flights per day, every day of the year, those 6 additional seats generate more than $1.6 million in annual revenue from a single airplane. Now imagine an airline operating hundreds of aircraft. Suddenly, a few inches of legroom are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That's why airline executives obsess over cabin layouts. Empty space doesn't generate revenue, seats do. This is also why modern seats look different from older ones. Airlines invested heavily in thinner seat designs throughout the 2000s and 2010s. Less padding, slimmer seatbacks, lightweight materials. Airlines argued that lighter seats improve fuel efficiency, which is true. But the more important benefit was that thinner seats created room for additional passengers. Passengers lost space, but airlines gained revenue. And because every major carrier was facing the same competitive pressures, nobody wanted to be the first airline to voluntarily give up seats and raise prices. The result is the modern economy cabin. And the timing couldn't be more ironic. Seats have been shrinking while passengers have been getting larger. Since the late 1980s, the average American adult has gained roughly 15 pounds, and waist measurements have increased by several inches. Yet airline seat pitch moved in the opposite direction, falling from around 35 inches to roughly 29 inches on many carriers. In most industries, products evolved to match their customers. Airlines did the opposite. Just as passengers needed more space, airlines started giving them less. Shrinking seats solved one problem. It allowed airlines to fit more passengers onto each flight. But eventually, airlines realized there was an even better opportunity. Instead of simply taking away comfort, they could take it away and then sell it back to passengers as an upgrade. Think about booking a flight today. The first fare you see is usually basic economy. Then there are upgrades, seat selection, priority boarding, extra legroom, premium economy, business class, first class, the same airplane, the same destination, 6 completely different experiences. Services that used to be included in the ticket price have been separated into individual products. From an economic perspective, it's brilliant. Different passengers value different things. Some people care only about the lowest possible price. Others are willing to spend more for additional comfort. Instead of charging everyone the same price, airlines can now charge each passenger according to what they're willing to pay. The result is a tiered system where discomfort itself becomes part of the business model. Create a seat that's slightly less comfortable than passengers would ideally prefer, then offer them a paid upgrade, and millions of passengers willingly accept the offer. In a strange way, airlines aren't just selling seats anymore. They're selling relief from the seat you originally booked. This strategy has become so successful that many airlines are now focusing less on economy and more on premium seating. A recent Wall Street Journal analysis found that major airlines have been increasing premium seating significantly faster than economy seating. Airlines like Delta, United, and American are redesigning aircraft interiors to include more premium economy seats, more business class seats, and more premium products overall. Why? Because premium passengers generate extraordinary amounts of revenue. Premium economy often takes up only slightly more space than regular economy, yet airlines can charge 2 or 3 times more for those tickets. Business class is even more lucrative. On many long-haul routes, airline executives openly acknowledge that premium cabins are responsible for most of the flight's profitability. Here is an example from Delta Airlines. In late 2025, Delta generated more revenue from its premium products than from its main economy cabin. Think about that. The relatively small section at the front of the aircraft generated more money than the hundreds of economy passengers sitting behind it. That would have sounded impossible 20 years ago. Today, it's becoming the industry's future. But if airlines have spent decades squeezing more passengers into the same aircraft, it raises a question: how far can they push it? Believe it or not, some people in the industry have already explored the answer. One of the biggest supporters of this approach is Ryanair CEO Michael O'Leary. Over the years, O'Leary has become known for pushing ideas that most airline executives wouldn't even talk about publicly. At one point, he suggested removing aircraft toilets to create space for additional seats. His reasoning was straightforward. If removing 2 lavatories created room for 6 extra passengers, the airline could lower ticket prices for everyone. Later, he discussed the possibility of standing cabins. The concept involved removing several rows of seats and replacing them with upright, saddle-style positions. According to O'Leary, passengers would gladly pay €1 for a standing ticket rather than €25 for a traditional seat. No regulator has approved such a design. Current safety standards make it highly unlikely anytime soon. But the fact that serious industry figures discussed these ideas tells us something important. The incentive always points in the same direction: more passengers at more revenue, lower costs. Which brings us to the biggest question of all: are shrinking seats actually safe? Most people assume governments regulate seat sizes. Surprisingly, that's not really the case. In the United States, there are no federal minimum standards for legroom, seat width, or passenger comfort. Instead, the key requirement is evacuation. The FAA requires airlines to demonstrate that a fully loaded aircraft can be evacuated within 90 seconds during an emergency. Even more remarkably, that requirement assumes only half of the aircraft exits are available. The idea is that one side of the plane could be blocked by fire or damage. As long as airlines can satisfy that evacuation requirement, seat dimensions are largely left up to them. In 2018, Congress instructed the FAA to investigate whether shrinking seats could create safety concerns. The agency conducted a series of evacuation studies involving hundreds of volunteers and various seating configurations, including some with only 28 inches of seat pitch. The FAA concluded that seat size did not significantly affect evacuation performance, but critics weren't convinced. Consumer advocacy groups argued that the tests failed to replicate real-world emergencies. There was no smoke, no darkness, no panic, no falling luggage, no families trying to evacuate together. Senator Tammy Duckworth became one of the strongest critics of the testing process, arguing that evacuation studies should include older passengers, people with disabilities, and children. Because real emergencies don't happen under laboratory conditions. The debate continues today. The FAA maintains that current configurations are safe. Passenger advocates continue arguing that shrinking seats create unnecessary risks. What's interesting is that even the FAA acknowledged one important limitation. Their studies evaluated safety, not comfort. In other words, regulators may believe shrinking seats are safe enough. Whether they're comfortable is an entirely different discussion. And that's really the story of modern aviation. Airline seats didn't shrink because engineers forgot how to design comfortable airplanes. They shrank because airlines discovered that most passengers would trade comfort for lower ticket prices. The economics were simply too powerful to ignore. Every inch of legroom has value. Every row has value. Every seat has value. And for decades, airlines have been finding ways to extract more value from exactly the same amount of space. The irony is that flying today is more accessible than at almost any point in history. Millions of people can travel by air who never could have afforded it during aviation's so-called golden age. In many ways, cramped seats are the price of democratized air travel. But there may be limits. Passengers are getting larger. Cabins are becoming more crowded. Premium seating continues expanding. Economy continues shrinking. And airlines are running out of room to squeeze one more row into the airplane. So the next time you're wedged into seat 26B wondering where all your legroom went, remember that you're sitting inside one of the most fascinating economic experiments in modern transportation. Because airline seats keep shrinking for the same reason almost everything changes in business. Someone figured out it was profitable. And until passengers decide comfort matters more than price, airlines will keep searching for ways to sell us the space we used to get for free.